Redfall. People are still wondering just what the heck happened behind the scenes. How could they launch the game this way? Why was it not delayed? Was there troubled development behind the scenes? How was this approved for launch given the half-baked state and the unpolished state that it launched in? The review scores keep getting worse. I think the Metascore's actually gotten lower. It's sitting at a 56 now on Xbox Series X. The user score is at a 3.1. And then on the PC version, 55 Metascore and user score of 1.9. You've got the Open Critic page that shows that top critics have rated this game a 59, but only 14% would actually recommend this game despite the score, which is quite abysmal. On Steam, still mostly negative reviews, sitting at 32% from 1,500 reviews, which makes Redfall still among the worst user-rated games on Steam of all time in the top 20. This is not fully updated. This is 29%. Even at 32%, you can see right here that number 20 here is 34%. It'd be below that. And then in terms of player engagement, you can see right here that after a meager all-time peak of 6,000 players, a little over 6,000 players, now we're in the triple digits in terms of how many players are engaging with this game on a daily basis. Now, in a recent interview with Kinda Funny, Phil Spencer was very open and candid about what happened with this game. He addressed Redfall's poor launch and straight up admitted that I take responsibility. I'm upset with myself. And that's all something that I've covered in a previous video. I appreciate his candor, but at the same time, Xbox does need to start executing. Sentiment only takes you so far, as I've said before. Now, one thing that I haven't covered yet is something that Phil Spencer mentioned about behind-the-scenes goings-ons, where he said that we thought genuinely that this game would rate better, and the metric that he used to see whether this game was worth launching in the state that it did was mock reviews. This is an article by news outlet Multiplayer First with a headline that reads, "Redfall mock internal reviews rated it double digits higher," says Phil Spencer. Now, this is not the first time that I've seen a headline like this where a disastrously launched game came out to really poor reviews, didn't sell very well, and then after the fact, a developer or a producer or somebody higher up in the chain comes out and says, we thought the mock reviews were a good indicator that this game was, while not perfect, good enough to ship in the state that it did. And to this day, I'm still wondering, why the heck do we rely on these mock reviews that are woefully unrepresentative of real-world conditions? And how are these mock reviews taking precedent over people higher up in the chain who can make tangible decisions, actually playing the game, sitting down, checking it out, and basing decisions off of what's actually there? Because with Redfall, it's immediately apparent that the game is woefully underbaked. The game design, the empty open world, the seriously messed up enemy AI that has been highlighted by pretty much universally all reviewers out there who check this game out. Just how underbaked everything about this game feels. There are some conceptual elements that definitely feel like they had potential with Redfall, but this game is so woefully underrealized that I don't know how mock reviews became the metric for, Redfall's in a good enough place, let's ship this out there, because I feel like it doesn't take much to see that Redfall should have been delayed, not just even by months. Months wouldn't have been enough to fix this. By years, I think they needed to overhaul many aspects of this game. Here's what Phil Spencer specifically said about this. As anybody in the industry, we have all seen downs. On the score, referring to the fact that Redfall launched basically mostly 60s in terms of review scores, and looking at the Metascore you saw, overall it's sitting at in the mid-50s. On the score, we do mock reviews for every game that we launch, and Redfall's review scores are double digits lower than we thought they would be through our mock reviews. We would never strive to launch a game that we thought was going to review in the low 60s. Well, this clearly shows a woeful flaw in the mock review process, and low 60s is overselling the score that Redfall actually got. Again, looking at Metacritic right now, we're talking about mid-50s. Phil Spencer says basically that based on their internal mock reviews, this game scored at least a 70%. And even if that's true, is that the best you can output? Is 70% the quality bar that you've set for yourself? 80% kind of maybe okay, sure, but I don't know. I don't know what exactly the mock review said internally, exactly what score they came up with. But if it was in the 70s and that was good enough for Xbox, and that to me highlights just a degradation in the quality bar that they've set for their first party releases. And if we're talking about mock reviews having been in the 80s, then these mock reviewers clearly don't know how to do their jobs, because there is no parallel universe out there that would rate this version of Redfall an 80 overall average on your score aggregate websites. Phil Spencer continued, if you look at our review scores over the last year, I think the teams have done a much better job in upping the level of quality of the games that we have shipped. Well, I don't know, like you look at Halo Infinite, that was the flagship game release for Xbox Series, and it just didn't do as well as we would have liked. Like, it's not a hopeless cause, like there's still room for the game to grow, but at launch and in its post-launch period, Halo Infinite was just real rough, especially on the multiplayer side of things, which is the thing that will keep players engaged with Halo for the long term. The campaign, I actually reviewed it. I thought it was a pretty good campaign overall, but even then, marquee campaign elements in the Halo series like co-op were not there at launch, and even when co-op did launch, there was no split-screen co-op multiplayer, which is such a trademark of Halo's, and so even aspects of the campaign and the features surrounding it were disappointing. How could such a flagship Xbox title still under-deliver with the content that it featured at launch, with the way progression worked, with all of the technical issues and progression issues and design issues? So, we really have to start seeing more varieties of these high-quality games that will allow Xbox to be at the output level of PlayStation and Nintendo when it comes to those big system sellers. Phil Spencer continues, some of those games first shipped on PlayStation, but still, this game, Redfall, was significantly below our internal metrics in terms of where it actually reviewed. But that's not on anybody but us. We have to own that, and I'm glad that he is admitting mistake, and hopefully they'll rectify the mock review process or forgo it entirely. I just feel like mock review processes, just don't tend to be as useful as companies think they are. I think mostly you just have to have that gut feeling of, like, when you play the game, what do you feel? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel like something's missing? Does it just generally feel like it's not ready for launch? And if any of those alarms are going off in your gut, then that's probably some kind of sign that this game is not ready for launch. I mean, the fact that the game launched on consoles with just a 30 FPS mode was sure sign that there were going to be performance issues and that they were making compromises when it comes to the quality of the title's release. That to me was a sign where I went, oh, I think this game, when it launches, it'll become apparent that it should have been delayed. Lo and behold, unfortunately, that gut feeling turned out to be right. And I'm willing to bet that developers had the same gut feeling, but developers aren't in charge of decisions like when a game launches, what's the release date, when they have to get this out by. They're working under constraints that are established by the higher-ups, who can make decisions surrounding whether a game should be delayed, whether it needs more time in the oven. And so, I feel for the devs as well, who probably knew that Redfall just really wasn't what it should be. Now, Eurogamer also published an article about this whole mock reviews process and went into further details about this, and even brought in somebody who is a video game consultant, Nathan Brown, to talk about the mock review process behind the scenes and just how strange it is that Microsoft and Xbox thought that Redfall was ready to be shipped, and that the internal reviews thought that Redfall was in an acceptable state. We'll get to that in a bit, but before that, here's kind of Eurogamer's explanation of mock reviews. Video game publishers typically invite consultants to review a near final build of the game to set expectations internally on how it'll be scored. Obviously, it's a very flawed process if they were so off the mark. Additionally, consultants are often employed throughout a game's development to provide an external perspective on its progress, with early impressions helping identify and correct issues as they arise. I have to wonder, do mock reviewers play the game in its entirety, or do they just play vertical slices, bits and pieces? Kind of like how the Redfall previews only encompass a very kind of small, zoomed in perspective of Redfall, because I saw a lot of positive buzz surrounding Redfall for those who did try the game out, save for some complaints about AI. There were a lot of people who were optimistic about this game. And then those same previewers try the whole game out, and zooming out and looking at the game as a whole and playing through the entire experience, they realized that that microcosm of an experience wasn't enough to gauge just how flawed and how empty and how underbaked the entire experience was. Did mock reviewers go through that kind of process where they just played bits and pieces, or did they actually get to try out the whole game in its entirety to really gauge whether this game was ready to be shipped? There are many questions surrounding this, because Eurogamer aptly points out here that the fact that Microsoft expected much better from Redfall reviews has raised eyebrows, including from those who are part of the video game consultancy process. Here is what video game consultant Nathan Brown said. It's certainly very strange. While mock reviewers will typically overlook bugs or minor technical or performance issues, you know the game is still being worked on and can assume in good faith that they're being fixed. That's not always the case, as we saw with recent releases like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which ran like ass on PC. Redfall itself performs poorly on both consoles and PC. Last of Us Part 1 PC ran like ass, so on and so forth. I could just keep going and going. The consultant aptly points out here that when it comes to Redfall, it's not just the bugs and the performance issues. Those are not the reason Redfall has reviewed so poorly. It's the design of the game, the lack of content, the lack of life in the world, the baffling gameplay decisions, the shoehorned in looter shooter elements that add nothing to the experience, so on and so forth, the emptiness of the world, the enemy AI, the storytelling. All of those would have been obvious while the game was in development and should have been called out. If we're to take Phil Spencer at his word, clearly Microsoft needs some new mock reviewers. Right, whatever mock reviewers evaluated Redfall before its launch clearly didn't do their jobs correctly. And again, I question whether mock reviews should be something that corporations and game publishers should be relying on. Just how helpful has that really been? And is that really the best way to determine whether a game is ready to be shipped, especially when these mock reviewers are willing to overlook a lot of technical issues because in good faith they believe that this stuff will be fixed, but that isn't often the case. So can you really rely on this stuff? I already think it's kind of iffy that so many corporate decisions are made off of things like the Metascore, a number that is so reductive, and it's hard to really fully gauge a game's qualities from just a freaking number. But now they're going deeper by just arbitrarily coming up with a number off of mock reviews. And that number, what does that ultimately mean, and are they really getting a feel for the game with just this number versus actually, sitting down and really playing the game? Forget the freaking number, the mock review stuff. Like, what are the general feelings you get when you experience a video game? So much of video games is about that feeling that the experience evokes, whether it's joy, wonder, and, on the other side of the fence, frustrations and just negative sentiments that might potentially indicate that maybe there's some things to sort out. The mock reviews just feels like such a flawed simulation in this echo chamber that maybe sometimes is useful, but it's clearly not reliable enough if, Redfall's internal testing can miss the mark by that much. The mock reviews for Redfall can miss the mark by such an egregious degree. And it's also worth noting that Microsoft must have known on some level that Redfall would not be reviewed particularly well, given that reviews for the game were embargoed right up until the day of its release. That's a sign of a company, a publisher, that is not confident in their product. Otherwise, they would let these reviews go up days, weeks in advance so people can have as much heads up as possible about the quality of the game, and those who truly believe that their game is freaking awesome will let people know how awesome this game is through reviewers as early as they can muster. It seems clear to me that on some level, the higher-ups at Xbox and Microsoft knew that Redfall would just not review well. Nathan Brown concluded by saying that what I find even stranger is the suggestion that Xbox management had no reason to dispute the mock review's findings. I've done dozens of mock reviews, and I don't think I've ever told a developer or publisher something they didn't already know. More often than not, I'm helping confirm suspicions they already hold internally. Did Spencer and his team really have no idea of the shape and state that Redfall was in the run-up to the release? I find that very hard to believe, though I suppose it would explain a lot. That's the thing. I feel like Phil Spencer is feigning ignorance and is hiding under the shield of, it was the mock reviewer's fault for telling us that the game would score at least a 70%-ish in that area or more. Again, I don't know what the mock reviewer's score was. It's really hard to believe that if Spencer really did his due diligence and checked the game out for himself, that he wouldn't have noticed the way Redfall was just so clearly in such a poor shape and state, so clearly underbaked and undercooked. He does say, it's not on anybody but us. We have to own to that, and, that's great and all to have that attitude of, we need to learn from this. But, the reality is that Redfall still took money from people with the way it launched, $70 or whatever, and some kind of due diligence wasn't done along the way of this process of trying to gauge the quality of Redfall. I feel like it's no mystery to figure out that Redfall shouldn't have launched on the day that it did. And I just feel like ultimately Xbox leadership just said, good enough, and let the shit fly. I mean, they saw the backlash surrounding the 30 FPS mode when it was announced that the game would only ship with a 30 FPS quality mode and no 60 FPS performance mode on consoles. And the fact that they didn't care enough to delay the game to at least include that 60 FPS mode at launch and to get the performance in order goes to show that this was very much a just freaking get it out there kind of situation. Whatever the case, this is just such a bad look across the board, and it's just a failure in the process of quality assurance for games that they're releasing. And the fact that Redfall is a major first-party Xbox release just makes optics that much worse. Because again, what does that mean for future first-party releases? But hopefully with how brutal the Redfall reviews and the feedback surrounding Redfall and the way the launch was handled has been, Xbox truly did learn some lessons and realize that they cannot repeat a mistake like this again, especially with Starfield. There's so much writing on Starfield, it being Bethesda Game Studios' first major release in many, many years, and it now being an Xbox exclusive. If they can't nail Starfield's launch, then Xbox is truly in trouble. Though I'm keeping my fingers crossed that, with the delays that we've seen for Starfield, that they're really making sure that this game meets the quality bar that it should meet. And hopefully it'll go on to be a marquee Xbox game, a must-have that will finally start to get the ball rolling for the Xbox ecosystem as a whole. Or at the very least, that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the idea of companies using mock reviews to determine some kind of internal numerical value that will hopefully be close to what actual reviews will be like, which just seems like a poor metric to me to put so much on this numerical value that was determined through a simulation of reviews that is very hit or miss. It just doesn't make sense for me to see companies relying so much on that stuff. But share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.